Sherm has become increasingly annoyed during his news conference on Tuesday. One media member concentrated on Sherman's questioning of coach's play calling last Thursday. Jim Moore of 710 ESPN Seattle asked Sherman if he thought he had a better handle on calling plays than offensive coordinator Darrell Bevell. Take a listen.
What I don't quite understand is Darrell Bevell's calling plays that he thinks are going to work, and yet you feel like you maybe have a better handle of what should be called.
No, I just we had a prior experience, so we talked about it. But let me guess, you have a better play call. Let me guess, you have better experience. Then you should probably kind of, stop.
What you didn't hear is that as Sherman was walking back to the locker room, he said this to Moore. You don't want to go there. You do not. I'll ruin your career. You'll ruin my career, Moore asked. How are you going to do that? Sherman said, I'll make sure you don't get your media pass anymore. Is that right? Moore asked. Yes, Sherman said, walking away. Yes, it is. So later, Sherman took to Twitter to apologize. I appreciate the role the media plays, and they have a tough job. I'd let it get personal today. I regret that. Next one should be fun. Stephen A., was Sherman out of line?
Yes, he was. Yes, he was. And in the interest of full disclosure, Richard Sherman and I spoke last night directly about it. He said that he kind of lost his way. He should not have done that. He apologized for it. But he wanted to emphasize that it wasn't him, trying to be disrespectful towards the media. It was him going at one particular reporter who he has experiences with, who he believes is more interested in sound bites than good journalism. I'm not here to critique in any way the professionalism of the journalists covering the Seattle Seahawks. I don't engage in that unless it's something that's flagrant and obvious. I was not there. I do not know. I'm just echoing Richard Sherman's sentiments in that regard. He felt like the guy was looking for a soundbite and was trying to antagonize him, as opposed to somebody that was interested in good journalism and asking good questions that would probe a good response, as opposed to, some soundbite or headline that can antagonize and exacerbate an already shaky situation. Having said all of that, it still doesn't excuse Richard Sherman. He recognizes that he was wrong, and he just said, hey, it's something that I can't allow to happen. I'm bigger than that. I'm better than that. It's not something that I should have done. I would like to also add that in the same breath that we say all of that, one of the reasons that we paired this in the same block as DeMarcus Cousins is because somebody would look to compare that to the DeMarcus Cousins situation. Both of them are smart. The difference is that DeMarcus Cousins appears to be more volatile. Richard Sherman appears to be more cerebral and is willing to dissect you intellectually and battle you in that regard, whereas DeMarcus Cousins comes across as if he caught you outside the arena, he would do something to you. That's why the DeMarcus Cousins situation has to be treated with an elevated level of concern in terms of monitoring his behavior and making sure that he's cool and he's operating on an up and up. In the case of Richard Sherman, this brother is as bright as they come. He's as smart as a whip. They're trying to win the Super Bowl championship. He had a moment where he lost his way, and that's what he wanted to make sure he conveyed to me and to the public.
Richard Sherman here is a completely different issue, I think, than DeMarcus Cousins. Richard Sherman is a Stanford-educated guy who is genuinely, it seems to me, apologetic for this situation, as opposed to someone who knows now, okay, I got to jump through these hoops to make this better. I think what happened with Richard Sherman is he gave into an impulse. He was angry. He gave into that anger, and it feels good in the moment. And afterward, maybe because he was caught, sure. Maybe had he not been caught, it wouldn't have mattered. But, he wouldn't have done this, or maybe he would have. But the point is, when confronted with this, he reconsidered his behavior. He realized it was impulsive and immature and irresponsible, and he holds himself to a good professional standard and therefore apologized for it. This is why Richard Sherman, in so many respects, is such an excellent example of the evolved modern athlete, and I'm a big fan.
You should be a big fan, but I wanted to piggyback off of something you said. Not that you said anything wrong there, Max. I just wanted to, just for the purposes of some of the audience out there, the kinds of folks that I communicate with on a daily basis. Let me tell you something right now. Yeah, Richard Sherman is from Stanford, and that definitely is worthy of being mentioned, considering the fact that he's from the streets of Compton. And also in the same breath, I don't give a damn where DeMarcus Cousins is from. You've got to monitor yourself and exercise control. You can't bring the streets to a professional environment. There's no place for that, and we need to say that. In terms of Ivy League, or not that Stanford, Stanford is Stanford, and DeMarcus went to Kentucky. Well, hell, you went to Columbia. I went to an HBCU known as Winston-Salem State University.
Explains why you lose all these debates.
Well, it doesn't. That actually, you got a lot more explaining to do than I do. I mean, you come from Columbia, which is an Ivy League school, and you getting your butt waxed by an HBCU alum every day.
I'm only allowed to use half my brain on this show. I didn't tell you the contract.
You know what?
Brain is behind my back.
The problem is you're usually using too much of it instead of being simplistic.
You may have a point.
But that's the whole deal. But here's the deal. In the end, in all seriousness, what it comes down to is that I just feel it's important that DeMarcus Cousins has a bright future, man. This dude can be a superstar in this league. I want this brother to succeed. But you can't act the way that he's been acting. He may have been wrong sometimes. Like he said, some of it's going on. It's ridiculous. But what DeMarcus Aldridge has to accept is the fact, DeMarcus Cousins has to accept is that he's brought some of that on himself. Because of his chirping, because of his talking, you got the officials monitoring everything he does. He's done that.
I brought up Stanford and the fact that Richard Sherman went there and everything, but you're right. Like, let's leave education or pedigree out of this for a second. Right. Even had DeMarcus Cousins gone to Stanford, there are some people you look at, I don't care where they're from, where they went to school, whether they're from the streets or not, whatever, you go, that's a live wire. There's something about their personality. They're live wires. DeMarcus Cousins is a live wire. I understand he values loyalty. I have had an interaction where he came on Sports Nation a year or two ago, whatever it was, 2 years ago, and I liked him. He was, I don't think he's a bad guy from what I could observe or interact with him, but he's a live wire, man. You see it. And he's got to get that under control, or someone does. And it's for his own good, because otherwise that level talent, which is rare, will be wasted.
All right, that'll do it. Coming up next, LeBron.
You notice, Molly, how nice I am. I'm letting Max have the last word today.
I realize that's so important. I didn't know. That's so important. I'm going to get to this next debate.
It's so important to him. I wanted him to have the last word. He did final take. Now he's the man. He wants to be the closer. So I want him to have that.
You see what's going on?
Yeah, Mariano Rivera right here to my left.
I'll let him have it.
I thought you were at a loss for words.
From now on, play Enter Sandman, okay? Can we get the rights to Enter Sandman when I talk?
Guys. No. In the final minute of the Kings' win over the Trailblazers, when he picked up a second technical foul after he appeared to spit or throw his mouth guard at the Portland bench. However, officials rescinded the tech after determining that he did not throw his mouthpiece, and he re-entered the game, finishing with a season-high 55 points. Here's reaction after the game.
It's ridiculous. It's obvious what's being done out here. It's on a nightly basis. I hope the world can see now what's really going on out here, because it's getting ridiculous. It's really ridiculous.
But did it come out of your mouth accidentally? Is that what happened?
Yes, man. This is ridiculous, man. I know what their game scheme is every night. They're hyping up their big man over there. He thinks he's a stopper. It's not happening.
From my vantage point, I thought that he taunted our bench, and as he was taunting our bench, the mouthpiece flew out. The referee asked me if it was his mouthpiece. I said that it was. Then he asked me if he threw it, and I said no, he didn't, and that's why he came back. It came out as he was yelling at our bench. His mouthpiece flew out. Whether it was intentionally spitting it out or not, I don't know.
I can't tell you what he said, but and before I say this has zero to do with the referees. It has everything to do with him. He deserved to be out of the game for what he did. His antics are over the top. He's disrespectful. I don't know that he spit his mouthpiece at me, but his mouthpiece came out of his mouth when he was screaming and yelling at me, and it was right next to me.
All right, Boogie certainly delivering on the court, but obviously he remains to be a headline off the court as well. Stephen A., should the NBA be concerned about DeMarcus at this point?
Yes, they should. They should be concerned about him, and I don't say that with any pleasure. I genuinely like DeMarcus Cousins. I think he's the best big man in the game. He's averaging 29 and 10 over the last 3 or 4 years. This dude has averaged 22, 24, 26.9. He's averaging 29.3 points per game this year. He is the best big man in basketball. DeMarcus Cousins is a star big man. This dude can be a superstar but he's got to get his head on straight. This is a guy that's incredibly temperamental, and he's got to find a way to reel himself in and get himself under control. He might be right in terms of that particular situation where he was talking and a mouthpiece came out of his mouth as opposed to him spitting out his mouthpiece. Even his opponent acknowledged that he was talking to him, and while he was talking smack and what have you, the mouthpiece came out of his mouth. He didn't say that DeMarcus Cousins spit it out of his mouth. The flip side to it is that there are a lot of instances where DeMarcus Cousins has found himself in trouble. Most recently, you're sitting there and you're literally threatening a reporter because he mentioned your brother in an article for all intent and purposes was relatively fact-based. Now, I'm one of those individuals, Max Kellerman, as a beat writer for more than a decade, as a journalist covering the NBA for more than 20 years, I'm very particular about mentioning people's family members and what have you. Those are things that you certainly don't do from an editorial and opinionated perspective unless it really, really warrants it. But if it has something to do with an incident in question and you're simply reporting the facts, then there's no reason for a player to get up in arms about it, and there's never an excuse for a player to go at a reporter the way that DeMarcus Cousins went at this particular reporter the way that he did, which is why he was fined $50,000, which is why he felt the need to apologize via a statement because the Kings probably compelled him to do so. But I'll take y'all back to an incident from years ago. And Max, this is just, this is me reporting here. Let me tell you what happened. Years ago, I think it was like 3 or 4 years ago, I'm not sure exactly, DeMarcus Cousins was getting the better of Tim Duncan in a game against San Antonio. Sean Elliott is calling the game for the Spurs. DeMarcus Cousins starts screaming, Tim Duncan cannot guard me. He cannot mess with me. This is what he's saying about Tim Duncan now. Tim Duncan simply looked and glared in the direction of Greg Popovich. Greg Popovich glared back and proceeded to call Tim Duncan's number for a play 13 consecutive times.
Popovich is the man.
That's right? And Tim Duncan, Max, scored on like 11 of those possessions, like just owned them. This is when in younger part of DeMarcus Cousins' career. So Sean Elliott sits up there and says, you don't tug on Superman's cape. After the game, DeMarcus Cousins is waiting near midcourt for him. Wants Sean Elliott to come over. And he said, man, I heard that you said X, Y, and Z about me. Sean said, yeah, I just said you can't tug on Superman's cape. And then he proceeded to threaten Sean Elliott. This is what has happened. So the NBA knows this. The Kings know this. The Spurs knew it. Everybody knows it. DeMarcus Cousins is a great young player. I think he's underpaid. I think he deserves more money. I think he's the best big man in the game. But there is no question. And by the way, the Washington Wizards should be doing everything they can to get him because he would love to be in Washington with his former Kentucky teammate, John Wall. They actually want to play together, and DeMarcus Cousins would love to be in D.C. He's hoping Ernie Grunfeld could pull that off. But in the end, Max, what it comes down to is this. None of this means anything if he doesn't reel himself in and get himself under control. He's not a bad guy. He talks a little bit at times. He's a bit temperamental. That feistiness makes him great. But in the end, it's also getting him in trouble, and he has to be careful, and somebody needs to say that. That's why I'm telling it, because I'm looking out for the brother. I hope that he does well. He's got to get himself reeled in.
Here's the good news about DeMarcus Cousins. I always ask this about a max contract player, and he's not that. He's to a very team-friendly deal. But eventually he will be a max contract player. When you use that percentage of your salary cap on a star player, you have to ask yourself the question, can he be the best player on a championship team? In DeMarcus Cousins' case, I believe the answer is yes. He is that good. There are lots of star max player contract type guys who I say, nope, not good enough. Really, really good, but not good enough. Boogie Cousins is that good. He is, you said, the best big man in the game. If you consider Anthony Davis something other than a big man, and yes, Boogie can get the better of him head-to-head, but overall, I think Anthony Davis, when he's on the court, is better than DeMarcus Cousins. But barring that, other than that, yes, he is the best big man in the game. He's just an outstanding player. Here's the bad news. He can't be the alpha on the team because he has a screw loose. He's a live wire. And in a way that has a detrimental effect on the team too often. He needs to be with another star player who is veteran, more veteran than he is, older and more experienced than he is, and still totally excellent. You know, Rondo seemed to have him in check a little bit, but Rondo at that stage in his career simply wasn't good enough anymore. Boogie Cousins has to be paired with an alpha who can rein him in, a guy he respects who's not going to tolerate that kind of behavior from Boogie. If that happens, a team can win a championship with that guy. He's that good, but I don't see another way. Maybe the right kind of coach can check his behavior and channel it in a more constructive way. But I think it has to be a player. I think it has to be someone out there on the floor with him.
Well, it's a couple of things I want to address here. First of all, in terms of being that dude, it's not because of his behavior. The biggest reason he can't be that dude is because of the way the game has changed. You got to remember, years ago it was man-to-man. There were no zone principles implemented. But since the zone principles have been implemented, the big man can't be the dominant force that it once was. And that's what you have. Is that, you know, you got stretch fours that obviously can make some noise. Boogie can do it. Boogie's special, just like Karl Anthony Towns is special, because they can step away from the basket and make noise. So I'm not saying they won't get their numbers, Max. I'm saying they can't be the alpha dog for your team because the way the game is presently constructed, with it being guard-oriented and perimeter-oriented, as a result, even though Boogie Cousins is big time, he can't be the dominant presence. The franchise, your franchise player itself can't be the big man because of the new rules that were implemented by the NBA in order to facilitate the influx of more European players.
I hear that
because
point,
they want
Stephen
to globalize the brand.
I hear that point. I think there are some players, for example, if Shaq were in his prime now, the rules don't favor him. They favor a different style of play. If Shaq was in his prime, he would still be immediately one of the 2 or 3 dominant forces, you know, along with LeBron in the NBA. Boogie Cousins, in my view, is so good that in spite of the rules changes, he could still be the best player on a championship team if he could get the other stuff in check.
Yeah, what I mean by it is that he could be the best player on any team, but it's not going to win you a championship if that's
you need
your
other
guy,
stuff too.
Because of the way you need other stuff. That's all I mean by that. Now let's get to the other parts that you were talking about, because when we look at his personality, him being a bit temperamental, I don't believe a great coach is going to do it. George Karl was a great coach. You know what Boogie Cousins did? When George Karl walked up to him, Boogie Cousins got up and walked away. Why? Because this brother, he's streetwise, he's got that temperament, and he's got a real aversion to you being two-faced and phony in any way. If you can't be real with him and straight up in every way, he has no regard for you, no respect for you. And not only that, he's averse to authority in some degree. Where he comes in and can get checked and humbled in a positive way is when he's on the court with somebody he's playing with, who's at an elite level, but also somebody he trusts, which is why I mentioned Washington, because John Wall is big time. John Wall is a genuine good guy. He can ball, and more importantly, he can get in Boogie's face, and Boogie's not going to want to beat him up. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, and that's the problem. That's why I brought up
he has love for him. That matters.
That's why I brought up being on the court with an alpha that he respects may be the answer here, because otherwise, Boogie is just a bully. You know, you don't want to be that guy. You don't want, and he's done it with teammates. He's done it with coaches. He's done it with management. He's done it with a reporter now, with the press. And when he apologizes for it, it doesn't seem to me to be genuine. It seems to me that he's jumping through the hoops he needs to jump through because there was universal criticism of him trying to silence or intimidate a member of the media. So I don't think it's good for him. I don't think in the long run he'd like to be a bully. I hope he wouldn't. And I don't think it's constructive in terms of ultimately what he accomplishes in his career.
We'll leave it there. We are staying with the association for our Twitter poll today. LeBron passes Moses Malone for 8th all-time on the NBA scoring list, which got us thinking, is LeBron a top 5 player all-time? Go on Twitter and vote. You don't want to miss that a little later in the show.